Welcome back to greentv.com and my ongoing series, Meet the Solutionaries, which I love doing. Very pleased and honored to introduce our viewers to someone I've just had the pleasure of meeting, Dr. David Guggenheim, who does a lot of really cool things. You're a marine scientist, conservation policy specialist, ocean explorer, submarine pilot, and an educator, teaching some interesting courses at Johns Hopkins. So we'll hear all about that, how you came to be the ocean doctor, and also about your upcoming book, not even out yet. So you heard it here first, and it is titled The Remarkable Reefs of Cuba, Hopeful Stories from the Ocean Doctor. So welcome, and I'm going to jump right in because I have so many questions.
Thanks for having me here, Betsy. Appreciate it very much.
Truly a pleasure.
It is amazing that we have forgotten about the oceans. From the surface, everything looks pretty good, but when you get down below the surface, you realize we've basically taken too many things out of the ocean, like fish. We've overfished many populations, sharks especially, and large predators, down as much as 90%. And we've dumped too many things into the ocean, especially in the book, I cover nutrient pollution, not so much the toxic wastes that we were dumping into the oceans into the rivers and oceans in the 60s, but fertilizer from farms and from even our backyards, which are causing all sorts of havoc in the oceans. So in fact, our oceans are in trouble and they do need a doctor. They need lots of ocean doctors.
There is ocean acidification, of course, from all the greenhouse gases that are getting, sucked up, I guess, by the oceans, the carbon sink, if you will. And guess what? There's some problems with that. It's not like, oh, it just goes into the ocean, so it's not in our atmosphere. Au contraire, as you say, overfishing, the plastic pollution problem, and
absolutely.
Just the fact that there's supposedly going to be more plastic than plankton at some point. I don't even know if that's happened yet, but clearly it's a combination of drivers that are really putting such a strain on our oceans, which are so key to our survival, not to mention marine life.
You're absolutely right. And what you've touched on is actually very important as well. We think of the oceans, we perceive the oceans, we tend to care about things that are large, like the great big, beautiful blue whale, for example, the largest creature that ever existed. But what's happening, whether it be plastics or acidification, a lot of the scary stuff is happening at a microscopic level. Microplastics can actually be ingested by tiny plankton, the base of our food chain, and be concentrated on the way up the food chain. And when you mix, as you said, when you mix seawater with carbon dioxide, you get carbonic acid, and anything with a calcium carbonate shell, whether it be a shell or corals, or tiny plankton with calcium carbonate shells. And that's the scary part. It's really hitting the base of the food chain.
So the shells of mollusks, that's a hard word to say, but are actually dissolving is what I understand. And
yes,
nothing else, if you like seafood, if you want to be selfish, be concerned about shellfish because they're
all of this. And it's, and many of us jokingly call ocean acidification climate change's evil twin, because for political reasons, we can't get traction on the fact that climate change is real, or if it is real, what to do about it, or if it's human caused. So the thought was ocean acidification. Who can argue with that? But it's not quite getting the attention it should. I think it's getting more. But as you point out, it's, we need to look at that small scale.
I call it oceans on acid, but of course it's not funny at all. Okay, I could go on, let's see, at least 10 directions, but let's start with how you became the ocean doctor. Where did that name come from?
We can blame my daughter for that. I was driving her to Montreal. She went to McGill. And I recalled my own drive, much shorter, in Philadelphia to the University of Pennsylvania, where I did my undergraduate. And my family it was sort of preordained for me to become a doctor, the other kind of doctor, the medical doctor. My parents couldn't imagine that my fascination with marine biology could possibly be a career goal aspiration. So as I'm driving, I said, yeah, I probably disappointed my parents. They wanted me to be a doctor. She looks at me and she goes, but you are a doctor. You're an ocean doctor. And I loved it. So I used it as my handle, name of my blog. It eventually became the name of the nonprofit organization I run here in Washington.
And, what more important doctor could there be? I mean, yes, we need doctors for people, but, if we don't have doctors of the planet, our personal health can only be as good as our planetary health. And we're both in trouble. I mean, humanity, in part because of what we're doing to Earth, but other things as well, like obesity, but we won't go, that's one place we won't go today. But you have a book coming out that is all about the surprising, pristine condition of coral reefs in and around Cuba. I guess it would be around Cuba, not in Cuba. And
Right.
that is such good news and such an interesting story. I can't wait to dive into, no pun intended. My husband is a diver, scuba diver, and when he's been, diving in the Caribbean, especially, comes back with, really depressing tales of, the corals being bleached. And we're recently spending time in the Bahamas and the same thing. And even though we see lots of beautiful, incredibly beautiful blue, green water and white sandy beaches, we haven't seen much marine life down there sailing. And I don't know what's going on there. Maybe you do, but let's talk about the good, hopeful news first. So if anybody's watching, they don't think, oh God, I'm going to get depressed, turned up. No, there's good news, but it's only going to be good if we can scale it up. So let's amplify it.
Well, a lot of organizations, a lot of people, including myself, began to give up hope for coral reefs in the Caribbean. The situation was awful as we got into the 2000s, and some organizations left, watching these corals get smothered with algae or get bleached, and in some cases just disappear altogether. So working in Cuba really came to my emotional rescue. Suddenly face to face with corals that I remembered as a teenager in the Florida Keys. Those corals in the Keys, maybe 80% dead right now. And just absolutely depressing to see what you based your entire career on disappear. Very heartbreaking. And I think in writing the book, I had to tell these stories of other places, of what we've done wrong, and learn from those lessons so we can understand why Cuba is different. But then seeing these corals, and in some cases better than I remember as a kid, really gave me hope for the first time. I said, if these corals 90 miles away from the Florida Keys can do so well, then we have an obligation to learn from them and see how we can restore coral reefs around the world.
Absolutely fascinating. And of course, Cuba is different. And what is it about Cuba that has left its corals in much better shape than throughout the rest of the oceans around the world?
Well, that is a long answer.
I've got time. I want to hear that.
I mean, the basic thing is I describe corals as Princess and the Pea. They are fussy. They are sensitive to so many different things, whether it be water temperature, the nutrient load in the water, which fuels the growth of algae. So it's a combination of things that have really led to the demise of our corals. Primarily, climate change is there, of course. Overfishing, where we've taken herbivorous fish off the reefs, and those herbivorous fish have a job to do, which is to graze the algae off the reef that would otherwise smother the reefs. And we're fertilizing that algae through waste from whether it be septic tanks or agricultural waste or even fertilizing our own backyards. That fertilizer does exactly what it does on your backyard. It stimulates plant and algae growth. And in addition to all that, there was a tremendous die-off of a very important sea urchin back in the early 80s, another important grazer of algae. So it was like a triple whammy. These poor corals didn't stand a chance.
Does it have anything to do with Cuba being less developed than other places in the region?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not nearly as much coastal development, which means not nearly as much nutrient pollution reaching the shores. It also has to do with the way they fish, which is at much more sustainable levels than elsewhere, though in some
Not
areas.
giant trawlers taking everything in its path?
Exactly. In fact, they banned bottom trawling in 2003. But it also has to do with other interesting relics of history, such as the Soviet Union collapse in 1991. And with that came all of the financial support to Cuba. So without that support, Cuba entered what was called the special period, a euphemism for extreme hunger, poverty, and many thought they would never survive. But what farmers had to do was turn to basically organic farming. They didn't have fertilizers. They didn't have the money. The Russian tractors broke down. There were no parts available. There was no way to fix them. They're basically half sunken into the ground now. So that translated into fewer nutrients going into the water. And finally, there just aren't a lot of Cubans in boats out on their reefs, doing what people on reefs tend to do, which is spearfishing and
jet skiing.
Jet skiing, yes. I happen to believe divers are a good thing for reefs. We all make mistakes, but in the end, divers are great advocates for the health of reefs, but that is also a factor.
So are there other places? I'm sure you saw Chasing Coral, which
yes,
left such an impression on me, and I'm sure everyone who saw it, as did the precursor Chasing Ice by Jeff Orlowski and team. Do you know of any other places around the world, either from that film or your own direct research, that are equally pristine? Is Cuba really a one-off, or is it just exemplary of what exists in some places beyond our usual reach?
It's not a one-off. It is a one-off in the reasons underpinning why it is the way it is. I suppose each island or each region in the world has its own story to tell. Cuba's happens to be very different and very unique. But there are other areas, and the Caribbean Bonaire happens to be very healthy. It has good environmental laws. In fact, Cuba actually has excellent environmental laws, though the enforcement is always the challenge, and they don't have great enforcement in every area that's protected, for example. There are places in Indonesia and even Australia around the world that are very healthy. And a recent study looked at reefs all over the world, looked at their resiliency, the probability that they would survive into the future, the ones that we might want to focus on protecting that could then reseed the reefs downstream. And fully 10% of those reefs, 5 out of 50, are in Cuba. So it really says something that those reefs are special and a reason for hope. And corals, when they reproduce, they release their eggs into the water, eggs and sperm, and they float with the tide and settle onto sand and other substrates where they can grow. And so if you map out where those currents go, then it's basically a form of triage right now, deciding which reefs to protect and which we know are just not going to make it. There's also some interesting focus on thermal resilience or thermal resistance. Certain corals do seem to have a leg up when it comes to being able to resist temperature. And there's even work being done on genetically modifying corals so that they are more thermally resistant. But in the end, we've got two sets of factors. We have local factors and global factors, climate change and acidification being the global factors. That an island like Cuba, they can do their part. They actually, believe it or not, are one of 10 countries in the world that has protection of the climate in their constitution.
Did not know
Added
that.
just a few years ago. But really, it's the big countries that really are making the most impact on climate. But then there are the local things that we can do: stopping overfishing, stopping nutrient pollution, stop dynamite fishing, and all of these other factors that we can control. And there's scientific proof that if we do right by these reefs locally, we can build more resilience in these reefs to endure a warming climate. And that's an important lesson. That's one of the most important lessons from Cuba. And it kind of goes back to the old adage, think local, act global, or however that goes.
Are you aware of any known dead zones around Cuba?
No, I don't think Cuba has the level of pollution that other areas around the world do, the level of nutrient pollution. Even Havana Harbor, which was very polluted, has undergone a restoration now. I think there's still probably some heavy metals and other things down there, but I think that they're seeing fish and pelicans and other things returning to that area. So that's very encouraging.
I see that Sylvia Earle, her deepness, is on your board. She's an amazing spokeswoman for our oceans. Everything she says is so profound that I always take notes when she speaks, and she speaks so slowly and with so much thought, and it is very profound.
And she's great. And she went to Cuba with me a number of times, and Cubans loved her too. I think her reputation transcends international barriers and politics and everything else. She's wonderful.
Truly. And she is a proponent of not eating seafood, otherwise known as fish. How important of a factor do you think that is? I mean, overfishing we've talked about, but can I ask, without putting you on the spot, do you eat fish? Do you think that's something that we should all try to stop doing? Like so much push is being made, rightfully so, to stop eating meat or cut back on eating animal products altogether.
Well, personally, I still do eat fish, but I'm very picky about the fish. And if you go out to dinner with me, you're going to hate me because I become the fish police. It's hard. I tend to eat very low on the food chain, like sardines and things like that. Mahi in many areas, as an example, can be very sustainable. But
sardines are sustainable. That's my new favorite breakfast, actually, sardines.
So sardines they're very good for you as well. They're not perfect. None of these fish are perfect, but I think Sylvia will tell you, eat them with respect. And I'm realistic because the audiences that I speak to, people do eat fish and they love it. So I feel like what I can best do is not tell people stop eating fish, but tell them how to eat the right fish, how to ask questions. And that's how the world changes. I feel like people have in their purse or their pocket the two most powerful tools in the world: their smartphone and their wallet. And if you ask questions of your server and they can't answer them about the fish you see on the menu, they'll go to the chef. If the chef doesn't know, they'll go to the boss, the manager. If he doesn't or she doesn't know, they'll go to the supplier. And eventually that's how the world changes, because they want to supply us with what we want. And if sustainability isn't a question we're asking about, we're going to get unsustainable fish on our plate.
I have to speak up. That's one of my biggest messages is if you see something, say something. And in this context, save something, save the ocean. Speaking of, my family and friends cringe when they sit down at a restaurant with me, which hasn't happened too much in the last 2 years. But of course, if they bring me water or even a cocktail with a straw, plastic straw in it. Why are you serving this? And that has happened in more seafood restaurants, and I can tell you. And in one case, I did get them to change their policy. It took 3 or 4 visits to the restaurant. And I said, I'll be back in a month or two, because they said they finally took it to the manager when I didn't see change. And sure enough, they now use paper straws, but still you should ask the customer, would you like a straw, or only serve a straw if one is asked for. So that's a whole other tangent. And I know
No,
straws aren't our biggest problem, but
it's important.
yeah. And
That's how the
all these
world
waiters say
changes.
they agree. Like, it's policy, but they can't tell you why. I said, well, you've heard about climate change, and our oceans are in severe distress. Aren't you aware of that? Show that you are. I said, people like me are offended that you're serving me a straw, whether I want one or not. And then they'll take it back. I said, well, don't bother, because you're just going to throw it away. That's not the point. Just say something, please, to your bosses.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're making progress on this. I remember 10, 15 years ago, I was out to lunch here in DC. There was salmon on the menu, just said salmon. So I asked the waiter, is this Atlantic or Pacific salmon? He goes, I'll check. Disappears for 10 minutes. I'm getting stink eye from everybody around the table. He comes back.
Oh, that look.
He finally comes back. He goes, sir, the chef has no idea, but he says it's delicious. Totally.
Wild caught or farm raised back then. Yeah.
He had no idea what the meaning of my question was about. And I think, I always leave people with the message, ask annoying questions. Really, you have
Somebody has to.
Yeah.
And in the Bahamas, we saw paper straws for the most part, at least and they should be, especially, countries and island nations that are dependent upon the ocean for their tourism and livelihood. It can't be such a big disconnect. So there are signs of progress, but of course we have a long, long way to go. So I could ask you a bunch of more questions, but I want to make sure I've kind of hit the top ones for you. Tell us about what to expect and look forward to in your book.
There are really 3 threads to the book. One of them, of course, is about the coral reefs, but that's only a minor story. Or I shouldn't say minor story, but that's sort of the climax of a whole set of history. You have to understand Cuba's history, but you also have to understand our history and the history of the rest of the world, how we got here. And only then can you really understand why these reefs are so magnificent and the emotional response. So those are 2 threads. The third thread, I suppose, is me, the adventures of a white guy from Washington, D.C., barely speaking Spanish, fumbling his way through trying to work with Cuban scientists, and many little self-deprecating anecdotes along the way. But in the end, having collaboration between American and Cuban scientists in marine science recognized not only as one of the best areas of collaboration between the 2 countries, but also something that helped underpin the restoration of diplomatic relations, build a foundation of trust. So I suppose that other thread is the most, in some ways, one of the most interesting and the silliest as well, in terms of my own my own adventures.
I heard coral reefs described as condominiums because there's so many inhabitants that rely on them for their survival. Explain that concept.
It's humbling. It's truly humbling. When you're scuba diving, I see a lot of people treat it as an Olympic sport. They're just powering through, trying to go as fast as you can. I always think the best dives are where you get down on your knees at the bottom, you stay in one place for a half hour, and you just look. And little by little, you see little creatures coming out, one creature cleaning another, a cleaning station where a grouper might park himself and get cleaned by a cleaner shrimp, or moray eels lurking inside, parrotfish grazing algae off the reef. It is a very complex layer cake full of life, and just a microcosm, I think, of our planet, of how we all are related to one another in some way. It's fantastically complex and humbling. And it also underscores the danger of messing with our ecosystems, because you pull the wrong thread, the results can often be unintuitive, unexpected, and happen very, very fast. That's what's happened with coral reefs.
And I understand in the web of life, if you pull on any part of it, there's going to be some consequence. And we are totally disrupting the web of life in so many ways. As you were speaking about the relationships between these wonderful creatures, I was smiling because I was thinking of My Octopus Teacher. I think that was the name of that movie.
Yes.
Did that surprise you that there was that kind of communication and connection?
I've had my own little octopus encounters, and I am so impressed with these creatures. They just exude intelligence. And I have met octopus researchers. None of them have been able to keep their octopi captive. They always find a way out. They'll slither down the floor, find the keys to the truck, and disappear down to the local bar. They're just so cool.
Then why are there so many on the menu? I don't eat it personally, but my family does. And I after seeing that movie, how can you eat octopus? But then again, I suppose I'm hypocritical too.
It's weird, isn't it? Because we'll eat a cow or another intelligent creature. Not saying cows are the most intelligent creature, but but there's something very unexpected about a marine creature like that, having that level of sophistication, intelligence, and personality. They're special. I can't possibly eat something like that. I feel the same way about grouper. They are, they're smart. They're really unusual. They'll follow you around. They're very curious. And I feel that they're my buddies. I can't,
There's a lot of grouper in Florida, Bahamas area. And while I don't eat octopus, my weakness is for lobster, which is just like probably my favorite food. And yet, recently there was research that showed that they're sentient beings, that they actually feel pain when they're put live into boiling water.
Yeah.
So I think that practice is ending. But, should we feel guilty? I do. I'm not sure that does much good, but there's certain things I won't eat, but there's certain things I don't want to give up. And I have a lot of cognitive dissonance about that. Because I imagine people.
It's really hard.
Have.
The world's changed since, I grew up in the meat and potatoes era, eat anything that moves. Nobody was thinking about sustainability. I think the thing we have to remember with many fish, although this is changing, is that it's still the last domain where we're hunting wild animals. And it's just not sustainable in the long run when you consider there's going to be 9 billion of us in the not too distant future. But there are still some fish that you can eat sustainably. My feeling is, select wisely. It's hard sometimes to know what fish are sustainable because many times you don't know what you're eating. You go to the store, places like Whole Foods are good about labeling the fish, but others you have no idea.
There used to be, Monterey Bay Aquarium used to put out a list of sustainable fish. I don't know if they're still doing that.
Yes, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch. It's an app for your smartphone, and it's fantastic. But it still requires work.
Yeah.
It still requires work because if you consider Alaska salmon, which are some of the most sustainable, it depends not only that they're Alaska wild-caught salmon, but what region and sometimes even what part of a particular river they're caught in. So I sometimes joke that you have to be a PhD to really get it down and know what you're eating.
And it's amazing that there's any salmon left because it's so popular and it's so good for you. It's on every menu, literally, and most often ordered, I would suspect.
Yeah, and most of it's farmed, much of it in Vancouver, British Columbia, I should say. And they're farming Atlantic salmon in the Pacific, basically. It's been shown that these fish are able to transmit disease to the wild populations. There has been escapement. All of that waste going into those fjords has has tremendous impact. So there's a lot of reasons not to eat farmed salmon from British Columbia.
In general, is farm fish not a good idea?
Recently, the graphs have crossed. We're actually now eating more farmed fish than wild caught fish on a global scale. So this becomes a very important question. The majority of farmed fish are farmed in a way that's not very sustainable. Let's stick with salmon for just a second. If you look at Chile, mass die-offs of these are farmed in net pens just offshore. Again, the amount of organic waste and disease and infecting wild populations, it's been disastrous. On the other hand, there's new technology. These are recirculating aquaculture systems that recirculate 99% of their effluent. You can grow hydroponic vegetables using the excess nutrients. Some of these farms actually make more money on the microgreens than they do on the fish. The fish become pets, I guess. But I've seen these systems in action in places like Malaysia and Denmark and in the United States. And what's great about it, just like these I forget what you call them, these little setups with lights that you can use to grow your own vegetables in your home, you can have this, in a building in Chicago, you could have fish farms stacked up vertically in a building and grow fish that's very fresh to market and do it sustainably. And no effluent whatsoever, doesn't have to be near the ocean. This is still evolving. There's a group called the Recirculating Farms Coalition that a good friend of mine, Marianne Cuffone, runs. This, I think, is the technology for the future for farmed fish. It's, as you're saying,
what about
little less guilt.
Is there, speaking of guilt, I like shrimp too, and I don't buy it that often because I know it's not good for mangroves and all that. And yet sometimes I give in, I get weak. So I bought some the other day and forgot I was going to make ceviche, and kind of got pushed to the back of the refrigerator, forgot about it till it was not good. And I wanted to revive dead shrimp. So I put it in ice cold water, hoping maybe I didn't have to waste it because it was a whole pound of shrimp. And alas, I had to part with it. But the guilt is one thing to buy it and eat it and enjoy it, but to throw it away, I mean, I'm crazy. So
I had the same story. I was given as a gift when I was in Russia, a can of caviar, sturgeon caviar, very endangered species. And I just put it in my refrigerator, not knowing what in the world to do with it. And then it sat there for years and I tossed it eventually. But
like a good wine, it can get past its prime at some point.
Yeah, there was no way I wanted to eat that. And it just didn't feel right. And
so shrimp, really quickly, what's your take on shrimp?
It's hard to find good shrimp. If you look at a shrimp trawl in the Gulf of Mexico, there's a tremendous amount of bycatch, including sea turtles, although that situation has improved because the turtles, there's a turtle excluder device where the turtles can escape, but they don't always. But the biggest problem of a trawl net is non-selective. It'll just catch anything that it runs into. So as a result, around 80% of what's in a Gulf of Mexico shrimp trawl is not shrimp. It's small fin fish, many of which die on the way up or on the way back down if they toss them over the side. And I don't think we tolerate this level of waste in any other industry, but somehow in the fishing community, it's tolerated. And so when you eat that shrimp, you're also basically
eating more.
Eating more, I guess. Yeah, you're
without getting the
more than just a shrimp.
Right, and
and in the
wild caught shrimp or fish any better? I mean, better than farm raised, you said that, but what about shrimp in particular? Less guilt?
There's also problems with farm raised shrimp because you mentioned mangroves before in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and other areas. They're hacking away mangroves, clearing space for these shallow water shrimp farms. And again, the problem of organic waste, you're losing mangroves, which are so important, vital for shoreline protection, for maintaining that beautiful ecosystem. So I don't know, man. I'm not sure there's a good shrimp on the planet. So
Well, so well caught is not
sorry.
much better, maybe a skosh better, but
Maybe
not,
somebody out there can
okay.
turn me on to a good guilt-free shrimp, but I haven't found one yet,
We'll
unfortunately.
probably may have to make one, all
Yeah.
the animal protein substitutes. So 2 more questions, and I promise I'll let you go. Ocean master restoration, OPR. Do you have an opinion? Are you familiar with that technology? I had someone on recently, a couple months ago, actually, Alex Carlin, who is very passionate about that as a solution, where it's about not sprinkling in anything other than industrial ways, but sprinkling nutrient-rich, iron-rich dust in some areas where fisheries have not thrived, and it brings back the fisheries and also somehow helps climate change. I'm not even sure I understand how all that works, but do you know about it? Do you have any opinion? And if you don't, that's okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, this isn't actually new. This isn't actually new. I've been hearing about this, especially in the Antarctic region for decades.
Oh, new to me.
This concept of fertilizing the oceans with iron. I have had the good fortune, I have a different take on this concept. Most of the ocean, let me just do a little science here quickly. Most of the ocean is considered a desert because the ocean waters have no nutrients. So you don't have primary production, the growth of phytoplankton, which is the base of the food chain, because they don't have any nutrients. They're plants. They need sunlight and nutrients. So if you do take those nutrients out there, like in this situation, yeah, you'll fertilize the ocean. You'll get that primary production. You'll get fish and so on. I don't like it because you're messing with an ecosystem. What I like, and I've had the good fortune to become involved with a man named Ralph Shami from the International Monetary Fund, who's also the founder of Green Blue Future. He has basically, among others, but if you can imagine an IMF report on whales, turns out whale poop is pretty important. And whale poop is fertilizer. And if you consider the fact that there are maybe 1% of the blue whales today that existed before we started hunting them, all of those whales out of pooping were making a big difference in the fertilization of our oceans. And it was natural, it wasn't artificial. And I prefer a natural solution. I feel like the way to get to this sort of a goal is to basically, undo some of the things that we've done wrong in the past. Whales being certainly one of them.
If Alex were here, sorry, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, please.
If he were here, he would say, because I've said, what about geoengineering? It's so scary. And he said, look, we are geoengineering our atmosphere. We humans have changed the climate, and we're in the Anthropocene.
True.
Humans are changing, all ecosystems. So why get so, concerned about trying to undo some of the damage with geoengineering? I don't know if you have a quick thought on that. And I know I still,
I don't have a quick thought on anything, but
and I don't have a limit to my questions.
Yeah, right. But I hear him. I hear you, and it's a good point. I did some work years ago for Biosphere 2 in Tucson, Arizona. If you remember, it was this huge structure where they locked 7 bios.
There was a film made about it, documentary.
Yes, they locked 7 biospherians inside, as they were called, wearing their cheesy, Star Trek-ish uniforms in there. And what happened was oxygen levels plummeted, carbon dioxide levels skyrocketed to near toxic levels. That's why I was brought on as a consultant to figure out why. The vertebrates died, like pigs and all of that. The pollinators died. And basically, the people we were working with were skinny as all get out. They lost an average of 30 pounds. They were pale and hungry. We were not allowed to talk about food.
Mm.
The only things that did well were cockroaches and ants, and they weren't supposed to be there.
They shall inherit the earth.
Yes, right.
Just-
So to me, that's a lesson that even in an ecosystem where we supposedly controlled everything, we were humbled by what we didn't know and anticipate. And so when we mess with Mother Nature, and there's so many examples of this, there are just unintended consequences and a lot of risk. And I, pardon the pun, enter those waters with great trepidation.
You probably are old enough to remember that commercial. It's not nice to fool Mother
Yes,
Nature. I
of
say
course.
it's not nice to fuel Mother Nature. And Lord knows we're seeing the consequences of doing that. The Great Barrier Reef just had another mass extinction event. Is this surprising to you? Did you see it coming? What should we think about it? And then my final question, you can answer both in one so I don't keep going. What would you like to see people who are watching this do to be part of the solution?
I have to say, it's not a surprise what's happened in the Great Barrier Reef, because these are such intense thermal events. Coral is already living up against the upper threshold of its ability to survive. I think it's been estimated now that the 50% of the Great Barrier Reef has been lost. Bleaching doesn't necessarily kill coral, but if it's prolonged, it will kill the coral, and that's tragic. I actually interviewed Jeff Orlowski, the director, creator of Chasing Coral, which was great. And he happened to be down there and his team during the first back-to-back warming events in 2016, 2017, if I'm getting the dates correct. And it's continued ever since. It's just hammering that reef. So here's an example where everything was done right locally. It's very well protected reef. In fact, it's far offshore, away from nutrient pollution. There's no fishing. That's frightening. That's really frightening. But we're also seeing some of those corals very resilient and tolerant. And I think that is what gives us hope. If we can get climate under control soon enough, there may be enough corals left to, to repopulate corals. The way we're going right now, it's predicted we may not have any corals left by the end of this century. So I certainly hope we have the wherewithal to meet some of these goals that we're setting for ourselves in reducing carbon, because it will make a difference to one of the most beautiful, unusual, and important animals on the planet, which are corals.
And of course, we need systemic change, but what can individuals do? Because it's so disheartening, but everybody just wants to know, what can I do?
It's frustrating, isn't it? Because the oceans are so big and we're so little. It feels like we're powerless.
Although
well, we talked about one
we're
of
having
them.
quite an impact on the atmosphere. We're not so
yes, exactly. Yeah, atmosphere is even smaller than the oceans. So we talked about one of these things. Ask annoying questions of your grocer, of your server at restaurants. Be very picky and really don't be afraid to ask. This is really how things change. It's driven by economics.
And most of the time they don't seem as annoyed as the people at my table. There she goes again. They appreciate, if you say it right, they appreciate the education. Oftentimes they'll say, I agree with you. I just don't know why we do it. And so there's no reason not to speak up. You have to do it respectfully and know it's not the server's fault or whatever, but exactly. I don't know how we're going to make change if we don't speak up.
Yeah, and it turns the whole thing on its head. People are able to compete based on the sustainability they're offering their customers. I wish I remembered the name. I was at a restaurant in New York. The server knew more than I did. Honestly, he was amazing. And he told me they all, once a week, go to school in the kitchen. And they learn about what's sustainable, what's not, and why. And it was fascinating to see that.
If you remember who that is, I'd love to do an interview with that person.
Yes, I will. I'll do that research. And
if they're still there, if the restaurant's still there after 2
I
years.
know.
Yeah. Okay, well,
The other things are, the little things that we can do in our lives. First of all, teach others about the oceans. It's still a mystery to people, but what we have on our side, I think, I give a lot of talks around the country, and I give a lot of talks in schools. I'm actually traveling to all 50 states talking to kids about the oceans, even in those landlocked states. I'm about halfway there. It's a big country. The oceans are cool. They're amazing. People love the oceans. They are afraid of the oceans.
well, they should be.
Still,
I mean, yeah.
the sharks still freak people out. But I think if you love the oceans, that's something that's very personal. It's in here. We all love the oceans for different reasons. For me, fishing with my dad off of Cape May, New Jersey, those were special moments for me, and smelling that salt air and wondering what was down there. For other people, it might be they got married on a beach and just fell in love. I think the key is that it comes from the heart and the imagination, and that's how you draw people in.
Absolutely.
And once you've reached the heart, the mind will follow.
You're so right.
And that's really been the approach. I hope, that's what I've achieved in this book, is really trying to tell a story, not as a science book, not as a history book, but a story about
love story.
A love story with a strange little animal, and how that evolves over time, and so many different things that affect that.
And how coral are the canary in the ocean mine, certainly. Yes. And I'm not going to ask you this, because that is a whole other conversation, which I really genuinely would like to have with you. And that is, the concern that, as kids are growing up, not having that baseline that you and I grew up with, and being on screens and not running outside and playing, and not connecting with nature enough. We can only save what we love and know. And that to me is, I think, the most concerning aspect. Like we talked about, just in our generation, growing up, we didn't talk about these things, and maybe a little bit recycling, but the whole, planet wasn't under duress.
Right.
It is now. Think about that in less than a generation, really, how much has gone wrong and downhill, and yet we're still not really addressing it. So thank you for your work. I will let you go. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I really appreciate talking with you. And you're right, we have lots more to talk about, don't we?
To be continued. And thank you for watching. I want to thank our viewers, and also encourage you to please subscribe to our YouTube channel, greentv.com. Why does that matter? The more subscribers we have, as soon as we hit 1,000, we're about not quite halfway there, but we're new. The sooner we can start live streaming. So this interview that you're watching has been slightly edited, probably was recorded a couple of days ago. We want to do it in real time, because sometimes there is breaking news. And as a longtime CBS newswoman, I like to get things on when they're hot off the press, so to speak. So thank you. And please tell everyone, like I said, you got to speak up, because the world doesn't quite know about greentv.com, but we are dedicated to covering these issues. And I like to say we pick up where the news networks leave off. Thanks so much, David Guggenheim, Dr. Ocean.
Thank you.